So if you're just learning to start dock starting or you're trying to nail your technique, then I get asked one simple question all the time, and that is, what foil size should I be using? Because it is a really confusing topic. I'm not going to lie about that. But hopefully this video will shed a little bit of light on it, because I've been down that rabbit hole where I've tried so many different foils. I know some people will probably disagree with what I'm saying, but this is just my take on it. So hopefully it will help a few of you guys out. So if you haven't met me yet, my name is Ian. I'm 36 years old. I'm a school teacher, which is why I love putting these videos together to try and help people out through their foiling journey. I've been foiling for around 7 years myself, dock starting for around 5. So I'm going to try and share with you all of the tips and lessons that I've learned along the way. So my first piece of honest advice is go bigger than you think you need. The reason behind that is because when you are learning to dock start, you want to try and nail the technique. The takeoff's hard, the jump's hard, the landing's hard, the pump then becomes hard. So you want to try and nail it, and having a bigger foil is going to give you a bit more leeway and a bit more time. It's going to be a bit more forgiving, which means you're going to be getting onto foil at a lower speed, and it's going to allow you to nail that technique sooner. Right, and here's the thing. If you start big, you can always downsize later on. You can go to a smaller foil or higher aspect foil later on. And doing it that way makes it so much easier. If you start on a really small foil or high aspect foil, you're probably going to get demotivated and maybe not continue with your dock starting journey. So I would suggest go bigger. And the next thing is, if you stick around to the end of this video, I will talk you through all of the foils that I have tried and what I used to learn on as well. So my second piece of advice, it leads nicely on, and that is higher aspect foils. Now, no doubt, higher aspect foils are a lot more efficient. Once you get onto foil, you can glide through the water easier, you can pump easier, which is going to save you so much more energy. However, that comes at a cost. And the caveat here is a higher aspect foil or a smaller foil is going to be harder to take off and get going on. That is going to make your learning process harder. So even though it's more efficient, it's going to make it harder for you at the start. With your higher aspect foils then, they are less forgiving when you land. You need more speed to get them activated. In addition, they have less lift at a lower speed. And then finally, they're usually quite a big old wingspan. So actually, compared to your larger, lower aspect foils, if you're falling, it could be getting in the way. It potentially increases that danger element of it. However, there's always another caveat, and that caveat is that manufacturers are now making higher aspect foils, which actually can take off at a lower speed and don't stall at such a high speed. So there is a caveat. You're going to need to look into that. It's not as black and white as when I first started dock starting about 5 years ago. So manufacturers are making higher aspect foils to be better at lower speeds. But I wouldn't, if I was you, be reaching straight out for a higher aspect foil if I was learning. Although they're probably going to be a better tool later on for you, I wouldn't be starting out one if that was me. Right, then one other thing to mention is smaller foils. Although this smaller foil isn't high aspect foil, it is quite a small surface area at only 1 foot or just over 1,000 centimeters squared. Small foils are going to be so much more fun. They're going to allow you to turn and just have such a good time. However, again, it's the same story as high aspect. A smaller foil is going to be harder to take off the dock. It's going to require you to run and take off at more speed and with more forward momentum. Therefore, that's going to make it trickier for you to learn on. So the way I think of it is the foils as a bit of a sliding scale. So the bigger they are, the easier it is to take off and the easier it is to learn on. However, the smaller they are, the more playful, the more fun it's going to be. But there's one other caveat again, is how big do you go? So that leads on to the last section. That is going to be about numbers. So what size surface area should I really be looking for? Most people, if you're learning, you should really be looking at anything from 1,300 centimeters upwards to around maybe 2,000 centimeters squared. That isn't a set rule. That is just my opinion. However, if it was me, I'd be looking at something at around 1,600 centimeters squared or slightly higher. Personally, for me, I think it's going to give you a bit more leeway off the dock. It's going to allow you to take off at a bit of a slower speed. It's just going to make the learning curve a lot easier, and you're going to get the reps in more with this once you are obviously taking off, landing, and on foil. So then finally for me, it's probably worth me talking you guys through about what foils I used to use when I was learning. And although I haven't got it now, I started on a big gong foil. It was massive. I'll try and get a picture up. It was 2,500 centimeters squared. Got to be honest with you, it was way too big. It actually had loads of lift that sometimes it would flick me off, but it got me learning and it allowed me to save time in that learning process, because every time I was landing on the board and I wasn't really sinking it because I had so much lift. So next up, I moved to an Axis P&G 1150. That was about 1,778, I believe, centimeters squared in area. That was a brilliant foil because it had loads of lift, but not too much. That again made the learning process super easy and enjoyable. So then I moved on to the SPG, and this is the Albatross. It's 1,615 centimeters squared. I still use it now because it's just nice and forgiving to get on. So then I moved on to the SPG. This is the Glide. This is 1,420 centimeters in surface area. It's a great foil. Once you're up, you can pump for so long. It doesn't turn too bad with the right tail. However, it does take more speed to get off of the dock, and you need to be pumping it straight away, otherwise it just won't activate. So again, a bit of a caveat as I drop to this one. And finally, what I also use, but it's a little bit harder, is this Glide R. When you're up on this, this pumps so well, it's super efficient and it's super fun, it turns great. The area of this is 1,160 centimeters, so you can see how it's dropped. Again, the same story as your higher aspect foils and your smaller foils is that it requires more speed on takeoff. So takeoffs are a little bit harder. Right, so that's my take on this. I would suggest go bigger foils to start off with. It's going to allow your takeoff to be easier. And then once you get the hang of it and you get your technique dialed on takeoff, then you can move to smaller foils and higher aspect foils. However, I do appreciate that foiling is expensive, and I wouldn't expect you to go out and just buy a brand new foil just to learn on. Try and use what gear you've got, try and borrow gear and equipment if you can, and then see how it goes. I would generally also love to hear what foil size you started on or what you're learning on right now. So drop the foil size in the comments below. It'll be super interesting for me to find that out. I've also put together a free foiling resource for dock starting, which talks you through exactly how to get started with your dock starting process. Hopefully that's going to help people out. You can find that in the link in the description below. And if you want to hear my 5 top dock starting tips, then check out the next video.